How about that? Okay. Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for coming. My name's Adam. It's nice to be back for the third and final. Debbie, I like that note. I realized when we talked about climate change over the last couple of meetings, especially the last one, it was kind of a bummer. I think I bummed myself out. There's actually more optimism than I let on, and I should have ended on that. So although this title is potentially the worst of all three, I'm going to end on a much more positive note about current changes in biodiversity. It's a very actually exciting time for biodiversity science and species discovery. So don't let the title fool you, but it is a theme we'll talk about today. First of all, this is what we're going to talk about. Are we in the midst of Earth's sixth mass extinction? Quick question. Does anybody know what this guy is here? What's that, sorry? Oh, this is the passenger pigeon. So it's largely considered to be one of the first species that went extinct over the last 100 years or so that we have like photographic evidence of. And that's a bit of a theme, this idea that extinctions on the rate that we're seeing them now are kind of a new phenomenon. And we'll kind of unpack that. So as a scientist, I love doing science. Science is also simultaneously a big pain in my side in many instances. And sure enough, the title of this talk is one of these examples. The prevailing wisdom of the theme we're talking about today is that we've entered into a sixth mass extinction as it's starting to unfold. That sixth that the Earth has experienced over its whole geological history. Some research just came out last week that suggested there's one that happened in Earth's history way before that we didn't know about until November 22nd, 2022. So technically this should be the title, Are We in the Midst of Earth's seventh mass extinction? But I'm going to use sixth because we'll just I put the presentation together before I saw it. Okay, so a quick question. When you see media reports of environmental issues, I'll give you two options. One is climate change, the other is biodiversity. Which do you see more often out of curiosity? Who sees climate change more often than biodiversity loss? Okay. And who would see biodiversity more, would you say? Okay. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. When I was looking up some context for today's talk, I tend to find that. But when you look a little bit, I think climate change dominates the environmental news spectrum. But perhaps on the second tier down would be issues surrounding biodiversity loss or species declines. And usually these stories show up in different ways. The point I'm trying to make here is, for any group of species that you're interested in, be it birds, trees, trout, freshwater fishes, insects, whatever the case may be, probably you can find some evidence in the scientific literature or in media reports that things are on a downward trajectory, that population numbers are on the decline. And by extension, what you tend to find in these types of stories is the reason why they're on the decline is a multitude of human factors. In particular, habitat loss as humans do things like cut down forests or convert wetlands into houses or stuff like that. And so you tend to see this. Humans are decimating wildlife, and this takes different forms. Usually it's population declines, but the ultimate thing that these population declines portends or sort of points us in the direction of is this idea of a looming extinction crisis, that we're going to lose more and more species permanently as these populations continue to go down. And so it's probably been about 10 years now that the science has pointed in this more definitive direction to suggest that human-caused losses of biodiversity probably represent something very weird in Earth's history, which is the sixth, now seventh, mass extinction event that the Earth has experienced over its whole 4.6 billion year history. And there's some extensions of this that kind of get a little freaky, I guess. You know, will humans survive this big event? I tend to find some of this science can be a little more almost cataclysmic in nature than climate science. So we're going to unpack a little bit of those headlines and talk about the science that underpins this ultimate thing, this idea of a sixth mass extinction event. Just out of curiosity, a quick showdown. Have people seen this term floating around in the media, the idea of a mass extinction event underway?
I worked in the Arctic for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, when the whalers came in, that was a complete extinction of any whales in Hudson Bay and the north. And all the people that lived there, you know, they dealt with them, the natives, and they used them just like, you know, polar expeditions. They took their clothes and from them so they could have you know, a great you know, that white fur. Nobody would eat actually a polar bear.
Right.
It was so oily and so on. It was not something to eat, but it was very important.
So sort of like, if I may, like localized experiences of species going down.
So, you know, what do they have now? They have beluga whales, you know, and even those are very, I've seen, you know, trackings of them, and they would come over to Seneculiac. Occasionally, they might kill 2 or 3 of them. But these are very small whales. They're only about 22 feet long.
Right. So yeah.
So that was a big change for them 200 years ago.
Yeah, so like localized experiences of population decline. Maybe the idea of like a global extinction crisis, for the same reason we say climate change is more top of mind, doesn't really show up. But we're going to unpack this science a little bit behind this idea that's been put forward for about 10 years, that we're in a mass extinction. Much like previous months, we're going to talk about these 7 things today. Each will take about, you know, 7-10 minutes, I guess. And by the end, we'll get to this, you know, important question about, are we in a mass extinction? What is that science telling us? This is where we're going to start, just to make sure we're all on the same page. This idea of different measures of biodiversity, just to center this discussion. So biodiversity can be measured in, you know, dozens and dozens of different ways. Generally, we think of it, I guess, across 3 different levels. One would be the idea of genetic diversity. That's all the complicated genetic makeup of every individual organism out there in the world. That genetic diversity supports species diversity, or each species is broadly genetically different from the next species. And species interact in such a way that comprises the ecosystems that we see, like wetlands or forests, or whatever the case may be. We're going to zero in on this one here, which is species diversity, and I'll unpack that in just a second. I just want to point out these 2 things as well. These are also critically important for the field of conservation, albeit in slightly different ways. For example, if you think about genetic diversity, when we talk about conserving the future of crop diversity or agricultural diversity into the future, what that tends to focus on is trying to increase or maintain genetic diversity of crops globally. So genetic diversity plays a really key role in things like food security. Does anybody know what this is?
Yes, that's where they keep seeds.
Norway.
Yeah, the Svalbard.
The islands.
Yep, the Svalbard seed vault. It's the one location in the world that's actually buried in permafrost, where different countries are sort of putting their unique genetic diversity of seed crops. The irony of it is that it's built on permafrost, and permafrost looks to be melting underneath it, so we'll see. This other idea of ecosystem diversity, we're not going to talk too much about it, but it's also an important governing principle for diversity management. So for example, the thing that Parks Canada does is select different locations across Canada that represent, ideally, all of the different types of ecosystems that are within our country. So these different parks are sort of selected in a way that maintains overall ecosystem diversity across Canada. But what we're going to talk about is probably the definition of diversity that I think is a little more on the tip of everybody's tongue, which is the idea of species diversity, or the number of different species that exist within an ecosystem, or in our case, we'll talk about it globally. So this includes plants, insects, mammals, well, things that live in soil, amphibians, birds, the list goes on and on. Just to put us on the same page as well, oddly, in biodiversity science, you can define species in like a number of different ways as well. This is usually what we mean by a species. It's a group of individuals that can breed among themselves, but don't breed with individuals of other groups. So a species is a reproductively isolated group of organisms. That's the operative definition that we're going to talk about. That seems, I guess, kind of obvious. There's all these tricky things that happen because species definitions can be a little bit non-obvious. So for example, I don't know if anybody saw this. This is from about 6 years ago now. As recently as 2016, we thought there was only one giraffe species globally, but that had recently been split into 4 different species of reproductively isolated groups. So we now have 4 different giraffe species globally. That just happened a couple years ago. Other things that we've studied and known about for upwards of 150 years, we're starting to recognize actually contain multiple different species within them. So the idea of a species is maybe a little bit more slippery than it lets on, but that's what we're going to be talking about today when we talk about diversities, the number of reproductively isolated species. This last thing, I just need to point this out because a couple of the figures I'll show have just slightly different words in terms of them. Okay, so when we classify species as biodiversity scientists or in a museum collection, all species in the world are classified and named within what we call a hierarchical system. And that is, for any species that exists across the world, that species, like us, has a name, which would be Homo sapiens, but that species belongs within something we call a genus or genera, sort of nested within that group. A genus or genera is nested within a family, which is nested in an order, in a class, it kind of goes up from there. So species classifications is hierarchical. Now, the only reason why I bring this up is because some of the graphs I'm going to show use this level to express diversity. Some use this level, and generally we're talking about biodiversity at the species level. For our purposes, they're kind of interchangeable. That more families equals more genera equals more species, fewer families equals fewer genera equals fewer species. We'll just use those sort of interchangeably. That makes sense in just a second. So that's what we're going to talk about today, species, and the trajectories and changes of species diversity that are happening on a global scale. And probably the place to start is this big question: how many species are there on Earth? This sort of sets the tone for understanding whether or not we're in something of an extinction crisis. This is kind of cool. I find this fascinating, the sort of efforts or the search to count all species on Earth, because I think, myself included, most would think we have a pretty good answer on this. Because we've been asking this question for sort of over 2,000 years. This question of how many species exist on Earth is sort of documented as maybe one of the first written environmental science, ecological questions globally. And we have some written records, I guess you could read them, from Aristotle in the year about 350 BC, who posed this question: how many organisms are there, and how are they distributed around the world? It's getting at this, at the time, philosophical question of humans' place in the world, about how many species there are. They've done these wild 3D reconstructions. That's what we think Aristotle looked like. Handsome Aristotle. But although we've been at it for over 2,000 years, it's actually, for reasons I'll explain in a second, it's kind of a tricky question. It's a little bit difficult to specifically say how many species there are on Earth. It's a very simple question to ask. I think it's a very logical question to ask, but it's for reasons I'll show it, kind of difficult. One avenue of this question is a little more straightforward. We know that we've collected and named and described a lot of species. And these are the things that show up in museum collections, like in the Royal Ontario Museum. This is what we would call described species, or the other word, which is kind of like a library an algae, cataloged species. These are the things we took the effort to as humans to name, describe, and collect some representative sample of. And that we can get a pretty good number. We can get a very good number of how many species on Earth we've cataloged or described or popped into museums, and that's these numbers here. These are ordered according to these different taxonomic groups, like insects, arachnids, like spiders and ticks, mollusks, crustaceans, fishes, birds, reptiles, and mammals. And you can see definitely the diversity globally that we have is overwhelmingly insects. It's the most diverse group that we know about. And this number is somewhere around the order of about, I guess that would be like 1.2 million, something like that. That's the number of species that we have in museums. But for different reasons, we know this is just like a tiny fraction of all the stuff that's up there. And the way we know that is through a couple different means. The first of which is that we continue to discover amazing, incredible new species every year. You can do this on an internet search. This is from an organization called Mongabay, which is really nice environmental science type of news. And you can kind of find these lists. There's no shortage of them. This is a list of top 15 species discovered from the year 2021. I'm sure the 2022 lists are coming out. It's not like species discovery is over. We're continuing to find really cool new stuff. And stuff that you probably, I always think, haven't we discovered that already? So for example, this is from, I think, 2020, just a couple years ago. Like, we discovered a new species of primates. We discovered a new species of wolf in a certain part of Africa just a couple years ago. Deep sea discovery is always very wild. We're starting to pull up more and more sort of like fishing nets and stuff like that. This is a ninja lantern shark. It's like a bioluminescent, like a self-glowing shark from deep in the oceans. And we discovered this guy, which is a shape-shifting frog. It actually changes its skin texture over the course of like 1 or 2 minutes. It kind of becomes, it goes from like sort of thorny, rough and rigid to like smooth. So we're discovering all these fantastic things. This is a total digression, but I can't resist. I suspect if you do a quick search for species discovery, you're probably going to see species that are named after something in pop culture. It's a weird trend that's going on. It seems that biodiversity scientists want to name their things after famous things. And so, for example, this is a weevil that was named after a Star Wars character. Johnny Cash got a tarantula. SpongeBob SquarePants got a mushroom named after him. Lady Gaga has like, I don't know about dozens, but a large number of species named after her. Trump was the, he was the object of not so flattering naming, species naming that happened during his presidency. You can find a list. It tends to be a thing now that as we discover species, which happens quite commonly, we name them after someone famous. This is kind of funny, and then I won't beat the point with that horse. Scientific American actually released like a how-to guide. So if you want to get a species named after you, you can go ahead. It usually means money. Often you can like buy naming rights. There's like a, what's it called? It's like an internet casino monkey or something. Anyway. So this is what I'm getting at though. We continue to discover new stuff. And by extension, we know the catalog stuff is just a fraction of what's out there. And just back to this point, these were some discoveries that were listed following, I think it was a deep oceanic expedition off the coast of Australia just a couple weeks ago, where we're finding these things like blind eels, other eels, kind of nasty looking things. This is what they're referring to as like a stilt fish. It lives like kilometers down below the ocean surface, and it's a fish, but it's kind of walking on top of the ocean surface. So some really fantastical stuff. They always look terrifying. These tend to be quite small, but they look really cool. And it definitely gives you a sense that there's a lot of biodiversity we haven't discovered yet. Yeah, these ones, these are like flatfish. So they just sort of hover on the surface of the ocean. Same with, I guess this kind of looks like a flounder. Yeah, the pierogi fish.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
is anyone investigating to see whether ones like that one in the bottom center are
This one?
just, yeah, from having to live in the murky filth that we call the ocean? Maybe that used to be something we recognized?
That's a great question. Are these images of adaptation to new environments? Generally, we're pretty sure they're not. It's because these collections are happening in very remote parts of the world that we've never really discovered before or explored before. And by that I mean we're talking like, if I remember correctly, these are like 5-ish or more kilometers down. And so basically we know there's no species that we knew of before that would be living that far down. It's such a harsh environment. So it's a very good question. These are new to science though. Yeah. So there's a lot of species being discovered and explored, and this is just pointing to this idea. We have stuff in the museum, and then there's stuff out there that we don't know about. So when we ask this question, how many species are there on Earth, we're kind of taking a bit of a guess based on what we do have in museums and what we can make some inferences of. And this is a paper that came out, it's not the most exciting visual, but this is a paper that came out in 2011 or 14, I think, that was set to be the definitive number of how many species exist on Earth. And again, it's not very exciting, but I'll just show you where the number comes from. What they did was look at all these different species kingdoms, like the animal kingdom, fungi kingdom, the plant kingdom, and then sort of microbes and that kind of thing. What we get from this paper is one thing. This is the number of these that we have in museums, which is about 1.2 million species wrong in museums globally. Then, through some fancy biodiversity stats, you can make an extrapolation and get an estimate. And that's the best we can do, is an estimate of how many species exist across the world. And I won't go into this too much, but just want to point out, at the time this paper came out, this is the number that they pegged as the best guess of how many species exist, which is 8.7 million. And that number was sort of propagated through science communication, especially media reports. So this is from the BBC in 2011, right after that paper came out. And that was the number we had to work with. Species count globally was set to be 8.7 million. Hold that thought for a second. When I talk about the good stuff at the end, this number's since gone up to like trillion. And I'll explain why in a second. But I just want to give you a sense of what we're talking about. When we talk about species loss and extinctions, we're talking about shaving off a proportion or a certain percentage of, a number that's in the millions, like a very, very large number. Okay, so that's kind of where we're up to here. We have, what are species? I'm going to lump these two together as we start to segue into this idea of a mass extinction event. That is, define mass extinction and talk about how these have unfolded and how we know they've happened in Earth's history before. So let's talk about this first question first. What is a mass extinction? I love these photos, these are the best. I tend to find that artist renditions of the dinosaur extinction and the asteroid that hit the Earth have an outsized influence on what we think mass extinctions are and how they happen. And generally, if one thinks about the dinosaur extinction, which is linked to the asteroid impact hitting the Earth, it kind of comes across as an instantaneous cataclysmic event where everything just disappears all at once. I love this picture. This is crazy. It's like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where you have like dinosaurs like getting blown to smithereens. And the reality is, in Earth's history and present day, this isn't really the case. That instead mass extinctions, and these are some definitions, are unfolding over much longer periods of time. So this is what we have defined in the science world as a mass extinction, where we lose about 75% of Earth's total species over, and notice this doesn't make sense right now, a short period of time. And a short period of time is in quotes here, because what we mean is that we lose 75% of species over the course of like 2 million years. And so by extension, when we use this term mass extinction, it's not the asteroid hits the Earth and everything's gone instantly. Instead, mass extinctions are unfolding over longer periods of time, and they're kind of related to biodiversity trends on much longer time scales in Earth's history. Ooh, this is the worst. I'm not going to talk about this at all. When I say Earth's history, what I mean is Earth's... Yeah, everybody's seen this before? What is this guy?
The geological time.
Geological timescales according to this very well. I'm not going to talk about this. When I say Earth's history, that's what I mean, Earth's geological history. Here we go. Earth is estimated to be about 4.6 billion years old. The biodiversity trends we're going to talk about pick up about here at 550 million years ago. So we're talking about a relatively small chunk of Earth's history, but still 550 million years. We're going to pick it up in the Cambrian. Isn't that, that's like a countertop company, isn't it? Yeah, anyway, that's where we're going to pick it up. And this is the trend of biodiversity through time that we can infer through the fossil record. So all of the geological samples, we can make some good guesses about how Earth's biodiversity has changed over the last 550 million years. So that's what we're looking at here. This is the number of families that were expected to be living at the time. Again, just as a recap, families kind of equates to species for our purposes. The numbers don't matter, it's the trend line that's more informative. And we're going to look at this following this red line from just about just shy of 600 million years ago through to present day. We got a couple things. In Earth's geological history, there's some very important biodiversity events that we know happened from the fossil record. The first one is this, where we go from 0 to something. And that's what we call the Cambrian explosion of diversity. This is where pretty much species the way we know them show up for the first time. And then you can kind of see there's some ebbs and fluxes, go like this, and then this is where we end up here, which is present day, which is actually considered to be the most biodiverse time in Earth's history. But along the way, you can probably note there's some big dips. And those big dips correspond to what we've understood to be Earth's previous mass extinctions. And these happen, they're all named here. These names correspond to like the geological names of Earth's history. So for example, the Cretaceous period, the Permian, the Devonian, don't worry about those. What we take from this is every time that diversity trend line is moving along and it drops really sharply in the fossil record, it drops again. We infer from that a mass extinction event that happened millions of years ago. So, coincidentally, that the sixth one that threw me off happens here, like way earlier in the fossil record, which is for different reasons hard to do. I'll just highlight these. Besides the dinosaurs, I'm assuming most are aware of the dinosaur extinction. Are there any other extinctions that you've heard of before? They're kind of buried. Yeah, so I'll just point out two of them. These ones are older, This is the one that killed the dinosaurs. The Cretaceous extinction that happened about 65 million years ago. This is the one, another great rendition. There's always like a T-Rex yelling at the meteor as it's about to happen. But that's the Cretaceous extinction. That's the most recent one in Earth's history. And that's the one that kills the dinosaurs. This is what I mean. It's not like the asteroid hit and everything's gone. What we know now is that there was other factors that were leading the dinosaurs to decline. And then the asteroid impact just kind of put them over the edge. But the dinosaur extinction kind of unfolded over a very long period of time. Hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. And then made way for mammals. This is wild. Sometimes science just blows me away. Don't worry about the picture. I know it's a little mucky. This paper just came out, what was this, just about a year ago, a little bit more. We've actually determined that the asteroid that finally pushed the dinos to extinction hit the Earth in probably March or April. It's really amazing, and how we can do this is there's little fish that have been fossilized during that extinction event. And those fish kind of put rings on their bones, kind of like trees do. And you can kind of sand them down and they can pin down when these individual fish died, like during a growing season. So it's really amazing. We have evidence to suggest that asteroid that ultimately killed the dinos, would have hit the Earth in what would be our springtime. So that's that one. This is the other one I just want to point out, the Permian-Triassic extinction, or the Permian extinction. Whereas this is the famous one, I would say. This is considered to be the most serious or the really bad one. Because the Permian extinction, the biodiversity loss was considerably more extensive than during the Cretaceous. This is the one that's actually considered to have killed, it doesn't show it on the previous graph, about 95% of all species on Earth. The expectation is the Permian extinction almost wiped out everything that was living at the time. That process unfolded over, again, hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. And it's not an asteroid. This was owing to global environmental change, because a huge part of the world erupted in like a super volcano complex that covered a massive part of modern-day Siberia. And that throws off ocean chemistry, temperatures, all these kinds of things that species at the time are not able to adapt to. So oddly, we know a lot about the dino one, but the Permian extinction is considered to be far more severe. And there you go, we know we have pretty good evidence that it was volcanic activity on a big scale that did that. So this is the context when we say, are we in Earth's sixth mass extinction? This is the context that we're talking about, which is, we know we have 5 prior to present day. Is this trend line dropping down in a way that qualifies as a mass extinction event? And that's what we'll talk about next, these present day extinction rates and how they kind of compare to what we may have seen earlier in Earth's history. Okay, to get at this though, I just have to introduce one thing. There's an organization whose data we use to get at this question. And I don't know, has anybody heard of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN? Yeah, so this would be the organization that basically, I would say it's the world authority on biodiversity data. We have excellent data on a lot of different species, trends, trajectories, if they're declining, increasing, that kind of thing. And it tends to come or be housed by the IUCN. And what the IUCN does is collect data from different organizations in different countries on different species, like thousands of species, tens of thousands of species, really. And they give some kind of assessment on whether or not these species are doing okay, whether their populations are declining, or whether they've actually gone extinct. So for example, just let me scale back for a second. They published this thing called the Red List, the IUCN Red List, and that's where all of this biodiversity information exists. You can check out the Red List. I think it's great. It's kind of cool if you're an avid birder, if you're into gardening and interested in different plant species, you can look on the IUCN Red List, and you can do, they take common name searches and get a sense of how different species are doing. They'll give you some kind of range map. This is for blue jay. They'll give you some kind of estimated range map where this thing lives. And here's the important part. Up here, they'll tell you, based on the information they have, how that species is doing. And that sort of idea of how they're doing takes a couple different forms. They have green allocations, which means the species is doing okay. It can be the least concerned. There's no evidence that populations are going down. The red list can classify things as being, what do we have here? Endangered or vulnerable. What is here? I'll come back to that in a second. Critically endangered. Things are in really bad shape, but not yet extinct. And then it's actually the IUCN who makes designations on whether or not things are extinct. That is, there's no evidence that any individual from the species exists in the world. They have this other category, which is extinct in the wild. That just means they're in zoos only. Now, I just want to point out, it's actually quite a thing when the IUCN declares something extinct. It means we've been looking for it and looking for it and looking for it and simply can't find it. Because I always find this is an interesting thought exercise, which is, how do you know something doesn't exist out there in the world? And so when you get to this extinction, it means that there's been a ton of effort into trying to find it, but hey, it's just not there. And sometimes they're wrong. And this is why you see some of these funky things in the news, which is species coming back from extinction. And it's kind of not like they're resurrected like, you know, zombie species. It's just that even though the IUCN has made the declaration, there sure enough are some individuals that were out there that we just missed. Does anybody remember this? This was quite popular. What is this from? Oh, this is more recent, but this is the ivory-billed woodpecker, which lived in the southern United States. And it was almost like a Sasquatch sighting kind of thing. It had been declared extinct for, you know, multiple decades. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this guy, the thylacine, or the Tasmanian tiger. It's a marsupial tiger. It's actually related to kangaroos. This one was declared extinct, here you go, in 1938. But actually only just over the last couple of years we've been seeing sightings of it. So to this point, sometimes this happens. You make an extinction declaration, but it's very hard to confirm total absence of something. So when we do it, we don't do it lightly, but oh, here, more examples of this. This organization, Mongabay, has a whole news feed for rediscovered species. Things that we thought that were extinct, but sure enough, they're still kicking around somewhere. So we have like an owl. Where's this guy? This was in Southeast Asia. A bat that, I don't know why they call it a comical bat, that was missing for 40 years. It's been declared extinct and it showed up again. This giant otter in Argentina, which we thought was extinct. A New Guinea singing dog, also in Southeast Asia. This is just 4 of probably dozens of these kinds of things that show up. Things that are declared extinct for decades are actually out there. But the point is, when the IUCN declares something extinct, sure, this kind of thing happens, but we've tried to find it, and we've tried to find it very intensively. And that's when we come up with an extinction declaration. So this is the number of species that the IUCN, you can see down here, has declared extinct since they kind of started doing this, which is in about the year, you know, over the last couple hundred years. This is the total. In total, the IUCN has declared 900 species to be extinct. A lot of those are mollusks and birds, and then sort of descending order from that. You kind of notice that this is a little bit flipped from our previous figure, which is there's no insects on here. And declaring insect extinctions is, for those reasons, kind of touchy subject, I guess. Okay, so this is how many have gone extinct, but it kind of doesn't answer this question. Are we in the midst of a mass extinction? To get at this question, probably, I think the logical next question is say, like, okay, to answer this, we just have to ask, are species going extinct? If the answer is yes, then, well, yeah, we're in an extinction event. But extinctions, and just bear with me on the logic here, extinctions are part of the natural world, and they have been for Earth's entire history of life on Earth. Even dating back to the Cambrian, when there were no humans around, or no mass extinction like an asteroid smashing into Earth, things still go extinct as a part of the natural selection evolutionary process. And generally what we think is that almost 99% of all of the species that have ever existed on Earth over 500 plus million years have gone extinct. For different reasons, some are swept up in those mass extinction events, and others just get kind of selected out, if you like. not fit for the environment and they go extinct. So, where am I going with this? So this kind of question doesn't really answer this. What we have to know, if we're going to answer this, is a little bit more of a specific kind of thing, which is, if we're going to know if we're in a sixth mass extinction, the way we can answer this is trying to figure out if current extinction rates, the ones we actually observe, the ones the IUCN is out there telling us about, are significantly higher than what you would normally expect the world to do. And any elevation above this, what we think is normal, would sort of start raising red flags that, oh yeah, extinction rates are higher than we might expect. So, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is the big one. This is the scientific study that came out, I guess just about 10 years ago now, that is getting at this question. Are current extinction rates, as informed by the IUCN data, higher than you think would happen just by freak chance alone, because the world's a tough place for species to live in? So this is the paper that came out. It's called Accelerated Modern Human-Induced Species Losses Entering the Sixth Mass Extinction. This is the paper, I think, that kind of popularized this idea. And I'll show you what the data means. This is, it's a little bit tricky. I'll try and break it down in the most simple terms possible. The tricky part about this is the numbers related to extinction rates are kind of weird. I'll leave it at that. They're weird numbers. So I'm going to swap this out, and what I'm going to call this axis is this. What we're looking at on the y-axis here is the percent of species the IUCN has looked for and monitored very closely that have gone extinct. So we can have none of those species going extinct, ranging up to, let's say, 2.5% of those species going extinct. And these numbers change over 5 time intervals, from 1500 to 1600, 1617, up to present day. So we'll look at these sort of across the last 500 years. This is what I want to point out. This dotted black line here, that's what we call the background rate of extinction. This corresponds to these low numbers, and that low number is our normal extinction rate. That's just what happens because the world is a hard place for species to live in. There's a background rate of extinction that's just constantly unfolding in nature. Yeah, please.
Over time, methodologies change.
Yeah.
And so when I look at this, I wonder whether anyone currently looking at this, then with the new methodology, regresses back and revises the old numbers.
That's a great point. And by methods, do you mean like
Well,
methods?
certainly the IUN reporting systems,
Yes.
which probably vary across the world a bit. So I would think the reporting systems get better and better and better over time, and then has anyone gone back and said, well, based on what we know now, we're revising?
That's such an excellent point, is that in biodiversity, this is a bit of a different theme. In biodiversity science, when we're looking at population numbers or extinction rates, we call it something called shifting baselines. And that is our point of reference, which is really, this is all a relatives. It kind of jumps around a little bit. So you're right. Modern biodiversity science has methods to correct for how methods change over time. That's a great question. It's a huge topic, but you're quite right. There are methodological changes. We do a pretty good job of controlling for them through different sort of stats and stuff like that. Great question though. Okay, I just want to highlight background. This is where, okay, so this is the background rate. This is what I mean where extinction rate units are so weird. I don't even know if I really understand them. Okay, so a background extinction rate is the natural rate. We can make a guess about that based on the fossil record, some theories and stuff like that. This is what it is. The background rate means 2 out of 1 million species go extinct every year. And that's why I have such a hard time with that. It's like a certain proportion of a reference sample of 1 million go extinct every year. That's why we're not going to worry about that. But there's a number that we would normally expect in nature. We have a background rate. It's got a very definitive value to it. So anything above this background rate is considered to be elevated. I think we'll leave it at that. These units are bonkers. Okay, so this is our background rate. We have that background rate of extinction. We're going to see a couple different trend lines in a second for different taxonomic groups, like mammals, fishes, that kind of thing. And this is where we are based on IUCN data. So again, this is the background rate, and this is where the extinction rates are estimated to be over the last century compared to that background rate. So you kind of see the background rate is sort of less than 1%, I'd say. You see sort of like, what would that be? At least a tripling of that number over time based on the IUCN data. And that is for the species that the IUCN has looked at really, really closely. About 2% of mammals are being classified as extinct. About just over 1% of birds are being classified as extinct, and sort of different groups. The take-home message is we have this big difference between the background rate and these other things that's suggesting, hey, actually over the last 100 years, we've seen more extinctions than you would expect by chance alone. So this is a weird graph. It's kind of not my favorite. There's another one in this paper that I think, to me, makes a little bit more sense. So let me try and unpack this one. Okay. So we've observed a whole bunch of extinctions over the last century, over the last 100 years, 114 years, based on the IUCN data. We know those numbers are a bit higher than the background rate. So that you can kind of rephrase this, saying, okay, if we've observed these extinctions, we know they're faster. How long should they have taken? How long should it have taken for all those species to go extinct if it just followed this background rate? Does that make sense? Okay. And that's what we're going to look at here. How many years should these extinctions have taken across these different groups? We're going to see two different numbers. There's a sort of conservative estimate and a very conservative estimate. I'll show you the difference. Okay, so for extinctions in fishes that we observed in the last 100 years, if those had just unfolded naturally, they actually should have taken between 2,000 years and 6,000 years. But we actually saw them in 100 years. For amphibians, this is where things are really dodgy. The amphibian extinctions that we saw over the last century probably should have taken, theoretically, 2,000 years, but almost upwards of 10,000 years if they just unfolded at a natural rate. Reptiles a little bit lower, anywhere from, 500 years to 1,000 years. So we've kind of accelerated this extinction process on the order of hundreds of thousands of years. And birds, kind of the same deal. Mammals, mammal extinctions probably should have taken anywhere from, 3,000 years to just shy of 6,000 years. And we've kind of done that in 100 years. And if you group them all together, these are kind of the averages then. So generally the extinctions we've seen across all these different groups over the last 100-year period probably should have taken between 2,000 years and north of 5,000 or 6,000 years. And that's what we mean by accelerated extinction rates. We've observed this stuff at kind of a lightning pace compared to what nature should usually be doing. This is a different way to show it. Yeah, okay, let's go for it. These are the background rates of extinction. We're just going to see a bunch of bars that give you an idea of how much extinction rates have gone up. These units are so thorny, they drive me nuts. We're going to see it pre-1900 and then post-1900, two different timestamps. This is the background rate of extinction. It's this 0.1 number. It's pretty small. That's that background rate. This is what we see for birds. The background rate is like 51 or 132. Don't worry too much about the numbers. I think the I'll boil down the take-home messages. Second, and amphibians, especially post-1900, we've seen this monstrous extinction rate, which drastically exceeds what you would consider as the background rate. Kind of the same message as the previous slide. Sorry, this really isn't my favorite graph, but let's just leave it at that. The take-home message from all of this work that came out about 10 years ago was this. When you sort of kind of mess around with the numbers a little bit, extinctions are now about 1,000 times faster than before humans. Alternatively, extinctions now are about 1,000 times faster than those background natural rates that are unfolding. So that's like the stuff that's gone. Like that's the stuff that the IUCN has definitively declared as extinct. But this is what we know is sort of coming back to that point about the dinosaurs and that this misconception that the asteroid might give us. We know that these extinction processes are actually unfolding a little bit of a longer trajectory. So we know we have elevated extinction, but this is the other part of this puzzle in terms of what the future of biodiversity is going to look like. Because while things have gone extinct, we know a lot of populations are declining, but the species haven't become extinct yet. And so this is, again, a different, kind of like a different side of the same coin. Is that how you say that? This is this sort of phenomenon that's pushing species towards extinction. There's a bunch of things, a bunch of species that still exist but aren't extinct yet. You kind of see this in the news in different versions. Usually population declines, I'll show in a second, get a lot of attention when the World Wildlife Fund releases their reports, which I'll show in a second. But sometimes you see things like this, which are mass mortality events. You know, for example, this is 400 elephants died in Botswana. We don't know why. Oftentimes you see these related to climate change events. But this is what I want to highlight here. This idea that, sure, there's not necessarily, there's a bunch of things that haven't gone extinct, but there's also a bunch of species that are moving in that direction. And we get at that by looking at population numbers. And that is how many individuals of a certain species there still exist. And this is, in the interest of time, I won't go through this in too much detail. This is gotta be the best source of information for that kind of stuff. This is the World Wildlife Fund Living Planet report. They release this every 2 years. And really at the heart of this report is a global assessment of species population numbers. Not extinctions necessarily, just how many individuals there are. And they can do this, kind of they use the IUCN data as well. And what they tend to show is, this is the global, I can show you different parts of the world. This is the kind of graph that they show. So let me explain this for a second. I should blank that out. What they have here is a population, like how many individuals there are. They use this sort of 0 to 2 index from 1970 through to present day. And they use this for a bunch of different species globally. They tend to generally use the IUCN stuff. What they do is peg species population numbers to their value in 1970. So anything that goes this way would suggest the species has more individuals since 1970. And anything that goes this way suggests that a species has been declining since 1970. To your excellent point about different methodologies, this is where that becomes a little bit more difficult. But the World Wildlife Fund has some pretty key takeaways, and that is for all the species that we're sort of actively looking at, evaluating how big their populations are. Across all of those species, which is, here you go, over 30,000 populations, over 5,000 different species, they've gone down globally by about 70%. We're we're just losing large numbers of animals, large numbers of plants, large numbers of different organisms that belong to different species. This doesn't mean they've gone extinct yet. It just means they're sort of edging towards those extinction thresholds to varying degrees. So, I'm going to flip the switch and talk about something more positive in a second, but just to button up this idea, have we entered or are we in the world's 6th/7th mass extinction event? The take-home message is not yet, but all of the data sort of suggests we're marching in that direction. So what we're looking at here are the big 5 mass extinctions. This is the number of species that went extinct during those extinctions. This is our, cutoff for defining a mass extinction. So in the Permian extinction, we lost, upwards of 95% species. The dinosaur extinction wiped out about 75% of things. This graph's a little tricky, so bear with me for a second. Just focus on these purple dots. Those are the percentage of amphibians, fishes, birds, and mammals that have gone extinct so far. And the number is, we're still well short of that 70% threshold. But these different colors for each of these taxonomic groups represent the proportion of amphibians, fishes, birds, or mammals that would be classified as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. So generally, this purple color, we want to kind of keep it over here as best as possible. But the suggestion would be that every time a species goes down in number, it kind of moves this way and inches closer and closer to those extinction thresholds. But the optimistic news is, although this idea of the 6th mass extinction is out there and it hasn't arrived in the same kind of way when we match it up with what's happened in Earth's history. We're still a long way off from that. But we do have evidence that we've kind of kick-started extinction a little bit, but we're a far cry from what happened, when the dinosaurs went extinct. So there's still room to maneuver, I guess. And that's where I want to wrap up this question of the future of biodiversity. I mean, holy, talk about a loaded bullet point. These are just some ideas, because I do think the title of the presentation is a little bit scary and freaky. But I think there's, in the world of biodiversity, some cause for optimism, not least of which saying, it's not like we've driven 70% of things to extinction yet. We're not there yet. And this is why I think there's some room of encouragement. We know most definitively when there's a species of interest that receives targeted conservation efforts, we can move things back from the brink of extinction. So for example, this is Zimbabwe rhino populations have seen increases despite other populations going down around it. And that's because the Zimbabwe rhino is sort of a flagship conservation species. So we know for sure this kind of thing happens when you kind of, for lack of a better word, set your mind to it. These conservation efforts and populations can be sort of brought back from the brink of extinction. This is another one that just came out. Endangered right whales, they might still be declining, but kind of like bending the curve, so to speak. Again, we know that conservation efforts can actually bring species populations back. It's demonstrated over and over again. And what this really has everything to do with is enforcement of conservation laws, practices, that kind of thing. So for example, we know that as one instance here in Indonesia, orangutan populations are going down. And we know for certain that's because laws are not being enforced. It's really quite a simple political maneuver, I guess. Just on that note too, just a couple other sort of broad ideas about the future of biodiversity. It is inherently, albeit a little more complicated than I'm making it out to be, a political issue. I don't know if anyone's aware of this. Man, talk about flying under the radar. Is anyone aware, just a show of hands, that Canada's currently hosting like a global summit on biodiversity conservation? Yeah, weird, eh? I think it's kicked off. It's in Montreal. This is like the biodiversity version of the climate negotiations you hear about. It's very similar. And it's happening this year in Montreal, where we're setting biodiversity targets and those kinds of things. And we'll see what comes out of it in terms of setting biodiversity priorities. Just the last 2 points here on this general theme of the future of biodiversity. I think the reality too is more and more of the world becomes urbanized, as we're going to see in Ontario, that a lot of biodiversity conservation into the future is going to be coming in urban ecosystems or right in our own backyard. And these are studies that are coming up again and again. It's really quite amazing. We're starting to see evidence that species are actually evolving into something new within urban environments. So species can live in cities, and it's very much just about making cities more livable for individual species. And so kind of on a slightly optimistic note, we know for a fact that what you plant in your garden, more native species, for example, actually has a very tangible impact on biodiversity conservation at a local scale. It can be very individualized and effective. And this just back to kind of link these 2 points together. It's not as though it's just common species that live in cities, but very rare things can show up in cities and your backyards as well. Your own backyard can be a very important refuge for biodiversity. This is one of those species we thought went extinct. A chameleon not seen in a century, which actually reappeared like in a hotel garden in Madagascar. So it's not like missing species or things, only rare species are showing up like way far out in the middle of nowhere. That we definitely know urban environments can be positive places for very rare things that we thought were extinct. And this is my last 2 points actually. We know we have a bunch of tools for biodiversity conservation. Some are straight out of sci-fi. I don't know if anybody's heard about this before, but one of the trends in biodiversity science right now is this idea of de-extinction. Has anyone heard about this before? To some extent, yeah. It's like genetic technology, right? Kind of that kind of stuff. But it seems to be that the next frontier of biodiversity science is going to be bringing things back that have been extinct for a long time. For some reason, we seem to be very obsessed with bringing back Ice Age animals, which, like the woolly rhino, or probably the one that seems most close is the mammoth. A lot of people think there is a viable mammoth out there somewhere in the world. This is from 2015, and we know that the pace of genetic technology can usually shock us. So I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised to see a mammoth walking around in the next decade or so, quite honestly. I don't know if that's a good idea. I mean, that's up for debate.
I don't understand. Where are they going to get this from? A frozen egg somewhere?
It's a great point. Maybe this is why they focus on the Ice Age stuff. With mammoths, they have like frozen, they died got buried in permafrost.
Right.
So they have, I guess it would be, I'm not a geneticist, like viable tissue, viable cells, viable DNA that they can then, is the mammoth? They put it into elephant embryos or something like that. So it's sort of like a weird, funky sci-fi gene splicing.
Good for a movie, right?
Fantastic for a movie. And I think we may see one in a zoo. So anyway, there's this kind of exciting element to biodiversity. I don't know if it's going to really, substitute, but anyway, it's on that. And this is the last point I want to make, is ironically, we're talking about this idea, are we in a 6th mass extinction, and we have some evidence that humans have jump-started extinction rates. It's weird because while that's happening, at the same time, I would say we're in the most profound period of species discovery that has ever happened. This has also a lot to do with genetic techniques. We're starting to learn more about microbes and fungi and small little things. You may have heard this term, the microbiome, the things that are living within us. And so this just came out, I guess, 4 years ago. Whereas in 2011, we thought there were 8.7 million species. The current number is probably upwards of 1 trillion species. There's a tremendous amount of undiscovered biodiversity out there, and all this stuff does really cool things, like degrade plastics and all this other crazy stuff. By extension, I guess Aristotle's kind of mad. We're not really getting any closer to answering his question. I think what we're starting to understand is that probably the vast amount of biodiversity out there is actually undiscovered. This is the number that came out. About 86% of Earth species still are out there waiting to be discovered. And yeah, this is the Aristotle. Are we getting closer to knowing how many species? Probably not. But what we are learning is that the world is a much more diverse place than I think we ever thought it was before. And now's the time to be learning about that. And now's the time that we're understanding that in more detail than we ever have before. And that's everything. So thank you for your time. Thank you for attending. And especially thanks for those who've come out to a couple of the success events.